Welcome on in, everyone, to our back to school webinar for freshmen. We're really excited to have you here. Freshman year is a very exciting time and a little bit scary. It's a big transition for students going from middle school to high school. You start at this point in your career as a student to build kind of the record of what is actually going to show up to colleges. So, no college is ever going to see your grades from middle school, right? They will see your grades starting from freshman year. So we're not going to focus too much on college explicitly in this presentation. It's more about how to get high school started off on the right foot. But we do want to just keep in mind kind of what it will all mean in the end. My name's Jim Wismer. I'm the director here at IV Experience, and I mostly oversee our standardized test prep and academic tutoring. So I work with families on plans for when to take the SAT and the ACT. Spoiler alert, freshmen, you have a long time, so don't worry about that just yet. We'll talk timelines in a little bit. And I'm joined by our co-founder, Karan Shah. Karan, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Karan Shah, as Jim mentioned. I'm one of the founders here at Ivy Experience, along with Eric Carlin. We've been at it now for 15 years. It's our 15-year anniversary this year. I still work with students on personal advising meetings, kind of the college counseling side of our business. And also, I still have my hand in some tutoring on the SATs and ACTs as well.
Awesome. Now, we like to start this process by taking that farther view ahead to the college admissions process. So eventually, when you're seniors in a few years, we will be talking about kind of your college application and college's decisions about whether or not to admit you. And when colleges make those decisions, they consider a whole host of factors. And there are a lot of factors that you can't control. Things like where other students at your high school are applying, your demographic information, your parents' education level. All these things factor into the decisions that colleges eventually make. But when it comes to things that you can do to help yourself and set yourself up for success in the long term, really there are six factors that you can put your time and energy into to help yourself. So those factors are your grades and the rigor of your coursework, letters of recommendation from teachers, standardized test scores, extracurricular activities, the written components of the application, and then the list of colleges that you eventually apply to. Now, again, if you're going to put deliberate time and energy into this process, it's best spent on these six areas. By far the most important of them in ninth grade is going to be grades and rigor, aka your performance in school. So, grades and rigor are by far the most important of the five factors when it comes to college admissions. Your performance on your high school transcript is going to matter more than any other single thing. Freshman year is all about building good habits and getting off to the right start. So you're going to have most likely a higher workload than you did in eighth grade. You're going to be adjusting to a new environment, a new layout. Your locker is going to be somewhere else relative to your classrooms, right? There's a lot to adjust to. And so good habits start now. And we'll talk a little bit about things you can do to lay the groundwork for those. From an admissions standpoint, junior year grades tend to be the most heavily scrutinized by colleges. So your freshman year grades are still going to matter, but not quite to the same degree. And your senior year grades will be important too, at least at the beginning of the year when you apply to schools. Colleges can see those. So again, we say this just to kind of set the table for future steps. One important thing to know about high school grades, and this I'd say is especially important for parents to understand because it's a lot different from when they were in school, is grade inflation. And what I have on this graph is basically a graph of the percentage of college freshmen who had at least an A minus average in high school over the years. We can see that that percentage back in 1966, when UCLA first started gathering this data, was 21.8%. And as of the last full year we have data for, 2024, it was 84%. So the fact of the matter is, with the situation in high schools now, most students are getting A's. And that's important to remember because a lot of times parents reach out to me and they, might say that a student has a really strong GPA. It's an A GPA. And while an A GPA is great and that's what we should be striving for, it doesn't help you stand out in the same way. It's really important to have it, but it's not going to be the same distinguishing factor that it might have been 20, 30 years ago. Now, to illustrate this point, what I have is admissions data from the University of Pittsburgh. This is a school that's increasingly popular with our students, so I like to use it as an example. And this data comes from something called the Common Data Set, which is an initiative where colleges publish data on their admitted class and some other kind of facts about their institution. Very useful place for people like us to go to find information. And you can see that the average GPA of enrolled students at the University of Pittsburgh in high school was a 4.08. And of course, a 4.0 is a perfect GPA. Pitt uses what we call a weighted GPA, and that means that they get a little bit of extra credit for AP and sometimes honors classes, depending on how your school calculates it. So at the University of Pittsburgh, the average GPA is more than a 4.0, and 61% of these students are applying with a 4.0 or higher as a weighted GPA. And so it's just important to keep these things in mind. Again, great grades are what I call a necessary but insufficient condition, meaning there's something you must have, but they're not going to be enough on their own when it comes to college admissions. There are other ways you're going to be asked to kind of prove it as well that we'll talk about.
So with that being said, what can we actually do this year, right? So most of your students have probably decided on their courses. A lot of students have probably already started school. Students down south started a couple weeks ago. Around I'm in Philadelphia. Philly just started this week, and so the important part is to get off on the right foot, right? As Jim mentioned, this might be the first time you're switching classes for your different subjects. You have different teachers for all your different subjects, right? So adapting to high school and making sure that you work hard and develop those good habits in the first couple of weeks of high school is going to be really important. Now, say you do end up in a situation these first couple months where the transition to high school maybe doesn't go as smoothly as possible, right? Not to worry, like it's not the biggest deal. As Jim mentioned earlier, 11th grades are going to matter the most. But it's important that we identify that and make sure that we do our best freshman year because while junior grades are looked at most closely, and when you actually calculate the GPA, they're all going to count the same, right? And so we want to make sure that when we're making that final average, that the freshman grades are as good as they can be. For students who are considering STEM tracks, so that's engineering, sciences, math, also a lot of students who might be considering business school down the line, they will probably need to have taken calculus in high school by the end of their senior year. What does that mean? We kind of need to figure out what math track the student is on right now, if those are things the student might want to pursue down the line. So the most common classes that students would be taking to stay beyond the calculus track would be if they took Algebra 1 in eighth grade and they're currently taking Geometry or Algebra 2 this year. And then for schools where it's more of an integrated math curriculum, most students would probably be in integrated math 2 right now. So if you're not kind of on that Geometry or Algebra 2 level, or in an integrated math 2 course, that's something to talk to your school counselor about and see what you would need to do to make sure you have calculus by the end of your senior year, especially if you're interested in those subjects. Now, with that being said, course selection is going to come up in January, February. It usually happens right around midterms, right after midterms for most students. Why is it important to think about now? There's two parts to course selection. The courses that you want to take, the courses you're interested in, the electives you'll take in high school. But a course selection for a lot of high schools also is determined by the teacher's recommendations, right? The high schools want to make sure the students are in the courses that are best matched for them. What does that mean? If you're planning on taking an honors course later on or an AP course in your sophomore year, your junior year, your teacher recommendations are going to matter. And so you want to make sure you're performing well in the classroom so that when course selection does come around, this teacher is recommending you for those higher courses if that's something you're interested in. With that being said, a lot of ninth graders might have already have honors classes in some of their subjects right now, right? And so as Jim mentioned, we want to make sure you have a course load that you can handle so you can get those great grades. So if over the first couple of months you realize, hey, one of my courses is really difficult, it's not like it's just not clicking for me, whether it be the class, whether it be the material, identifying that and being willing to move down a level to make sure that you're able to perform well in the course is important, but also to make sure it doesn't affect your grades in the other courses, right? Say your geometry honors class is really, really difficult and you're spending hours and hours every day after school. While the geometry grade might end up being higher, you're now affecting the rest of your grades as well, right? Your history class grade may drop, your English class grade may drop just because you're not able to focus on those as much. So figuring out that right balance for yourself, not only in freshman year, but throughout all of high school is going to be really important. With that being said, if you have aspirations, your student have those aspirations for those top 25 most selective schools in the country, colleges are going to expect to see the most rigorous classes taken and the best grades with whatever your high school offers. If your high school offers honors and AP classes or honors AP IB classes, that's what they're going to want to see throughout the student's career in high school. And so making sure that you get those good grades freshman year to make sure you're recommended for the AP and IB courses down the line is going to be really important.
So what can we do about it this fall? Right? The first thing I would say is plan based around last year's performance in coursework. And what I mean by that is that if you're a student who has, struggled in math historically, then chances are math is going to continue to be an area where you need to work a little harder this year. So think about what are the areas I've tended to struggle in and be proactive about trying to, set yourself up for success. Consider the final structure of your class. This is something to ask your teacher about early on. When I say the final structure, I mean some courses might have a midterm that is cumulative and a final that is cumulative, but the final doesn't cover things from before the midterm. Or they might have a final exam where the final exam is cumulative based on the whole year, right? So you want to know these things going into the year so that you can know kind of how long you need to retain certain things and how well you need to study certain topics. The better you learn things along the way, the less work you're going to have this spring. What you'll find throughout your high school experience, and whether this was true for you in middle school might vary, but throughout your high school experience, the spring, the end of the school year, tends to be a much more academically challenging time than the fall. There will be a lot of end of year projects, end of year papers, big final exams. And so, based on those end of year exams, it's just going to be the case that you have more work to do in the spring, typically, than you do in the fall. And that means that the better you can learn material as you go along the way, the better you set yourself up for success because it's less work to review something you learned very well than to have to learn things that maybe you didn't quite grasp the first time around. My first and probably best piece of advice for freshman year is if you find yourself struggling with your coursework, intervene early. Do something about it right away. When we say do something about it, your first line of defense if you're struggling in a course is always to ask your teacher for extra help. Many teachers will make themselves available before school starts, during free periods, after school, and they can often help you in a big way. And this also helps you build a better relationship with your teacher, which is something we'll talk about shortly. It's important to, advocate for yourself in these situations. And students, this is really a life skill you'd be taking, even beyond high school. I would also really recommend considering a study group if you find that you need to kind of work a little extra in a course. And this is something I recommend, if you have a friend who's doing really well in a course, ask them if they'd want to study with you. And a lot of students don't want to be the person to ask in these situations because they think they're imposing on someone and no one likes to be that person who sounds needy and asks for help, right? I found myself on the other side of this a lot in high school where I was often, the nerd who helped all of my friends with their homework. That's how one becomes a tutor. You start doing it in eighth grade. And so for me, my favorite way to study was to help a friend review the material because teaching is one of the best ways to learn something. So, students, if you're asking a friend for help with studying, with mastering some material, chances are you're helping them as well, even if you don't feel that way. I also recommend if these options fail and you're still struggling, that's the point where you should really consider private tutoring. And with private tutoring, the way that we focus on it with families is that, we want to teach a student how to fish, not just hand them a fish. We want them to be able to build sustainable skills over the long term that are going to serve them throughout high school and beyond. So that means learning not just the material in front of you, but how to study and how to learn material. Learn things about yourself as a learner so that you can set yourself up better for success in future courses. So when we work with students on tutoring, we also cover test taking strategies. And a lot of people are surprised to hear this. They know we do SAT prep, right? And SAT prep strategies are one thing, but when you're taking tests in your math class, you need to know the way that your teacher is going to grade you because you need to get used to writing out the work for your math questions on your test in the way that is going to maximize the points that the teacher gives you on that test, right? So we want to focus not just on making sure that you're able to master the content, but that you can demonstrate that knowledge in the way that's going to get you the grades that you need. That's true, especially if we're preparing for a big test like a unit test or a midterm or a final. Either way, like I said, my number one recommendation, whether it's tutoring with us or intervening with the teacher, forming a study group with your friends, again, intervening early is always going to be better than letting it wait.
So, Jen mentioned that one of the best ways you can advocate for yourself, try to improve your grades in school, is going to your teachers first, right? Why is that important? So, one of the things that's going to be different for your student in high school than was different in middle school is the relationships with the teachers are really going to matter. Now, if you notice, that's not what we had on our first slide about things in your control, right? It's because down the line, the teachers that your student will have will end up writing letters of recommendation, which is one of the five things you control. However, the foundation of those letters of recommendation are the relationships the teachers build with the students. It's not about just walking into a class and getting the best grade possible. It's about the teacher truly getting to know the student, right? If a student gets an A in an honors chemistry class or an AP chemistry class, right? The admissions officer know that what that means and they quantify that in a certain way. But that doesn't really tell us anything about the student's personality, what they're like, how they interact with other people, right? And so letters of recommendation are what admissions officers use to get to know those students, differentiate those students between all those students with the good grades and the good test scores and that sort of thing. So there are a couple of different people that are going to be writing the letters of recommendations for your student. The first is core subject teachers. So your student's going to have one or two core subject teachers, depending on the college they're applying to, that they're going to need to have to ask for recommendations. Now, what are core subjects? These are the classes you're going to be taking most likely all 5 years of high school: math, science, history, English, and foreign language. And most of the time, you're going to ask for letters or recommendations from your 11th grade teachers. Again, going back to 11th grade is the closest year, your full year you have before applying to college, right? So those are the teachers that are going to know the current version of you the best. Now, why are we talking about this in ninth grade if we're going to be asking our 11th grade teachers, right? Well, for a couple different reasons. One is depending on the courses you have, depending on the way your high school departments are structured, you might have teachers for multiple years. Your Spanish 1 teacher might be your Spanish 3 teacher. Your geometry teacher might end up being your pre-calc teacher, right? So there are teachers who often teach different levels within a high school. And so those teachers might get to know you for multiple years. And so if you establish that foundation now, you'll then be able to build off that when you have that teacher later on. Also, Jim will tell you a story in a little bit, but like your ninth grade teachers, they might get to know you in other ways outside of the classroom as well. So it could be in the capacity of they're an advisor for a club. It could be, Jim, you want to tell your story?
Sure. So I actually asked a ninth grade teacher for an optional third letter of recommendation, and I'll explain why. Because typically we actually talk students out of using the optional third recommendation, generally because college admissions officers read a lot of stuff and they don't just need to read one more letter for you. But the reason I asked my freshman year social studies teacher was because he was also my track and field coach. Track and field was my main extracurricular activity all throughout high school, but I was a late developer physically, so I was just bad at it for 3 years. I was putting a lot of time into it. I was a 3-season athlete in track and field, but I wasn't any good until my senior year. Unfortunately, track and field is a winter and spring sport, so if you're good at it your senior year, none of those accolades make it to your college applications, which you send in the fall of senior year. But I was putting a lot of time into this event and I was given leadership roles. I was actually allowed to supervise the weight room. Any lawyer parents here are probably gasping that they let a 16-year-old supervise the weight room at a high school, but it was a different time, okay? I also ran our fully automated timing system for invitational meets, and I was in charge of setting up a lot of meets. And generally, I was just trusted by the coaches with a lot. And because of that, I was not going to be able to make it show on my college applications, if I were to tell you, hey, I'm the most dedicated JV track and field athlete you've ever seen. that's going to ring hollow, right? Anyone can say that about themselves. For all they knew, I was just going to practice and picking my nose the whole time, right? Instead, I was able to have my track coach write a letter of recommendation, someone who knew me in the classroom from ninth grade, but also had seen me grow and develop over these years and entrusted me with a lot of responsibility. So that was a unique insight on my main extracurricular activity, and that was a reason to use that optional third recommendation. So it's possible that you ask a freshman year teacher to write that letter. It's going to be relatively rare, but it does happen.
And also, again, it's just practice, right? Learning to talk to teachers, learning to build that sort of relationship. Even if those ninth grade teachers don't end up being the ones that write your recommendation, it's just good practice for as you get into 10th grade, 11th grade, and there's teachers that you're more likely to ask. Now, the one person that you're not going to be able to ask, but is going to be kind of assigned by your school is your school counselor, right? So whether they call it a school counselor, guidance counselor, college counselor, whatever kind of the nomenclature your school uses, this is the person that is going to kind of guide you throughout high school, right? So they're going to help you with course selection. They're going to help you change classes, rearrange your schedule. So this does not mean you need to go in and meet with your school counselor or college counselor every single week, right? You need to just build a relationship with them in ninth grade, 10th grade, so that they get to know you a little bit better. If your student goes to a public school, the counselor might be writing anywhere from 100 to 200 letters of recommendation for their students, right? So it's really hard to get to know 100, 200 students that well. And so they often just rely on brag sheets or information about grades and clubs and activities. But if your student's able to go in and talk to that counselor, right? At major checkpoints, course selection times, as they've taken the PSAT, once they start studying for SATs and ACTs, if they've decided or have thoughts about where they want to go to college or what they're going to major in, right? Once you start building that relationship organically through sharing information that's going to be important for that counselor, that's how you build that relationship. So down the line, when the counselor is on recommendation number 55 out of the 150 they have to write, and they get to your student, they're really going to put the time and effort in, right? Because they got to know that student. They're going to be able to add more details that aren't necessarily there. On your transcript or on your activities list. Because a lot of counselors just kind of regurgitate that information because they don't know the student, right? So they just have to write what the grades and the activities show, but that's not really going to add very much. When an admissions officer sees a counselor letter that is authentic, deep, really shows insight into the student, that's what's going to differentiate that letter of recommendation from all the other ones that college counselors, school counselors might end up writing.
Okay, now we get to my favorite part of the presentation, which tends to be everyone else's least favorite, which is standardized testing. So I want to start this by just reminding everyone that we are here for questions. So when it comes to, any questions that you have, feel free to drop them in either the chat or the Q&A, and we'll answer them at the end. And we'll stick around for as long as the audience has questions for us. Now, I like to start the discussion of SAT and ACT and all of that by just a kind of broader point of, what is the point of standardized testing? Why do colleges use it at all? And the main reason is that it is the single best predictor of a student's success at college. So colleges track various correlations in the quantitative data, the numbers that they have for students. So they're looking at correlations with your GPA, standardized test scores, and things like your freshman year GPA at that college, and things like your probability of graduating from that college. And they want students who are going to have high GPAs and graduate at a high rate. And the single best predictor of a student's ability to have a high GPA and graduate, especially graduate on time, is a standardized test score from the SAT or ACT. It's a more reliable predictor than GPA. GPA used to be the strongest predictor of a college GPA. So high school GPA was the strongest predictor of a college GPA. But with grade inflation comes grade compression, right? When everyone's grades are high, they're not as different as they used to be. And so now standardized test scores are a much more effective way of predicting who will succeed at college, and that's why colleges use them. Standardized test scores also allow a college to compare you with your local context. So when you apply to college, one of the things that goes with your application is called a school profile. The school profile is essentially an info sheet on your high school. So it'll show the highest levels of various courses that are offered at your high school. It will show the percentage of students from your school that end up going on to college. It will also show the average SAT and or ACT score from your college. So, or from your high school rather. So colleges can compare your score with the average school score from your high school to get a sense of how you fit in the environment where you were educated. And then the last thing to remember is standardized testing is one piece of a holistic review process. So, in other words, no one thinks that standardized testing is the end all be all best way to understand the human being. It's an important data point in this process, but it is not the only one. Now, when it comes to standardized testing policies, they basically fall into three buckets. The first and the largest is test optional, and we're going to talk more about that on the next slide. It means you can submit or not submit a test score when you apply. Then you have test required, which is very straightforward. You can only apply to these schools if you have a standardized test score to submit. So examples are largely going to fall into the categories of large state schools like Ohio State, University of Georgia, the Florida State System, University of Tennessee, and also some of the most highly selective schools in the country, Georgetown, MIT, a bunch of the Ivy League schools. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have test blind or score free schools that won't use the SAT or ACT at all in their admissions decisions. This is mostly limited to the University of California and California state systems, although we're unsure how these policies will stick. And I will say that these schools, they're not technically test blind. They don't use SAT or ACT scores, but they do use AP exam scores in their admissions decisions. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, test optional is the one that's a little bit harder to understand because test optional means very different things at different places. All test optional really means at the end of the day as a label is that the college will take your application fee and process your application, whether it includes a test score or not. There is no indication in there of how likely you are to succeed with or without a test score. And generally speaking, when you apply with a test score that that college considers strong, your application will be stronger. But there are some schools that are less test optional than others. So Duke is a popular example with our students where over 70% of their students are applying with test scores, or rather being accepted with test scores. They're very unlikely to accept students who don't submit test scores. And then you have other schools like University of Washington, Temple, and a lot of the smaller state schools. Or sorry, when I say smaller state schools, I don't mean the flagship state schools like your Penn State, Wisconsin, University of Virginia. I mean the smaller state schools that would be affiliated with the state government, but don't play football on TV, for example. So those schools are often very test optional, meaning they'll admit a very high percentage of their students without test scores. The bottom line when it comes to test scores, and really all you need to know as far as ninth grade goes, is that a strong score is your best way to be admitted to college. It's going to increase your chances a lot. It's a strong admissions asset. It's going to give you more options for college because you can apply to colleges that really prefer test scores and colleges that require test scores. And it opens up merit scholarships as well. Merit scholarships, of course, being earned scholarships, and many of them require test scores, even at universities that are test optional for admissions. If you're interested in more highly selective schools, the test score is more important, both because highly selective schools are more likely to require test scores than other types of schools, but also because even when they are test optional, the more you have in your favor at these schools that, tend to deny the vast majority of their applicants, the better. And then the last thing I'll say here is that there are students for whom the amount of time and energy it would take to get a score that they would be happy with is just not worth it. Based on, if you take a student who has straight A's, they're taking an extremely rigorous course load, they're doing well on AP exams, but the SAT and ACT just they cannot translate to that test format. If that's the case, then that's when it can make sense to make a plan where you opt to go test optional up front. That's very much going to be the exception. We work with a few families each year that we recommend that to, but it's really only a few families each year that we would recommend that to. Most students are going to want to take these tests and see how well they do. Now, When do you do this? So I don't want anyone to leave this call worrying about the SAT or ACT because it is not time yet. Generally speaking, students will take the test for the first time during junior year. I get calls from freshman families every year asking to start test prep. And I tell them, look, the most important things for you to do right now are do as well as you possibly can in your math and English class. And if you can, develop a habit of actually reading for fun, because that is one of the things that will pay you off in a few years when you have to take these tests. That's really it as far as what you could do to prepare for these tests as a freshman. Just be a freshman and do your best in school. The rest will sort itself out. But when we talk about when to take the test, you really want to be finished with Algebra 2 and Geometry, or in most integrated math curriculums, it'd be Integrated Math 3, but it can vary based on how your school numbers it. And then you also want to consider your extracurricular and real life schedule. So most students will take the test for the first time during junior year. If you're done with the math by the end of your 10th grade year, then I recommend testing early in junior year because then you can take advantage of the summer to do your prep. And you can also just get it off your plate before that very busy spring of junior year. I mentioned spring is always the busiest year. Junior year spring will be the busiest time of your life to date. But you also do have to consider your extracurricular and real life schedule. So, for instance, if you wrestle and play football, those are fall and winter sports, and then you don't play a sport in the spring, it might actually make more sense for you to test in the spring. You might have more free time in the spring. So, you do want to consider those things as well. Now, when to take the test, we often get asked if there's a date you can take the SAT or ACT where there's an easier or harder curve. Uh, there are easier and harder SAT and ACT curves. They're not predictable. So there's no secret formula for when to take the test to get the highest score possible, other than when you can actually have the time to put in the work and effort it requires. The If someone tries to tell you like you should really take this test date because it's the one with the best curve, chances are they're telling you the time that is most convenient for their schedule to sell you test prep. It's really not how it works. Now, before you start on the SAT or ACT, you're going to want to try a diagnostic test of each test to compare your results and identify which of the two tests is better for you. For some students, they're going to score way better on one test or the other, and then it's quite obvious where they should focus. For others, if they score a little more similarly, then we want to look at, where are their strengths, where are their weaknesses, and how do we typically see students with that kind of profile improve on the tests. Best time to take diagnostic testing is 10th grade or the beginning of 11th grade. So, in other words, there's really nothing you should do about testing until at earliest, like October of sophomore year, when your school may offer the PSAT. At that point, it can make sense to start putting a plan together for standardized testing. But before then, really, it's not something to worry about. We offer free diagnostic testing. So if you are on our mailing list to get this webinar, you will also get an email from us about diagnostic testing to, for when the time is right in 10th grade. And when you complete it, we offer a test recommendation and then a free planning call with me to talk through what your testing plan might look like. The idea is that you want to just focus on the test that's likely to give you the best results.
So now moving on to another more subjective factor, right? So Jim talked about SAT and ACT scores. As you work through that process, eventually the college is going to see a number, right? And that's going to align with kind of what their expectations are. You might be higher, lower, that sort of thing. But extracurricular activities are where you can truly stand out and differentiate yourselves from other applicants. Extracurricular activities show the college who you are as a person and what your interests are, right? Your extracurricular activities will often translate into things that you end up doing on campus when you get to a particular college. So what does that mean for students who, as they're entering ninth grade for the first time, right? So there's a couple different things to consider. The first is that while there may be activities, say, for example, you've been playing soccer all your life, right? Or been involved in dance your entire life. While any awards and accomplishments and things like that might show up in some essays, they won't necessarily count for college in the same way. The college will want to see what you do from ninth grade through the time you apply to college. So colleges want to see a couple different things from your activities. One is depth of your activities, right? So figure out what you're interested in. If you're passionate about a particular thing, it could be sports, it could be theater, it could be band, it could be debate. Whatever really excites you and interests you are the types of clubs that you should get involved with, right? Your school is going to have a variety of different clubs, particularly the first couple of weeks. You'll have a lot of initial meetings. Go to a lot of those meetings. Just because you go to the first meeting for 10 clubs doesn't mean you need to be in 10 clubs by the time you even get to the third meeting of the school year, right? You need to find the places where you're happy. Now, these different clubs may appeal to you for a variety of different reasons. You may be interested in the actual thing that they're doing, right? The robotics club. If that's something that interests you, that's great. But sometimes you might just go to a club because you're slightly interested in it, figure out you're not as interested in it, but you find a community that you're really passionate about, right? People you want to be friends with, people you want to work with, and that might interest you in the subject that the club really focuses on. But when you're going to these club meetings, whether it be in school, out of school, it's not about what looks best on your application. Especially in ninth grade, you need to figure out what you like, what you may want to study down the line, what may be a part of your life in the future as well. And so figure out the things that are authentic to you, things you're passionate about, things you can see yourself sticking with through all of high school, so that when you do apply to college, your application comes off as authentic as possible, not just you put a bunch of things on your resume because you wanted to look good for college. So ninth grade, as I mentioned, is a time to explore, right? What you're going to be doing is trying a bunch of different clubs. And again, just because you missed the first meeting doesn't mean you can't try to jump into the second or third meeting or a month down the line, right? Doesn't mean you can't try to sign up. If your friend tells you, hey, this club is really awesome, I know you missed the first couple of meetings, come on and join in. Most clubs, unless there's some sort of tryout, like a sports team or a debate team or things like that, are usually willing to take on new members throughout the year. So take the time to explore different things. Now, with that said, I know a lot of the examples I gave, clubs, sports, theater, might be very school centric, right? That's not the only thing that counts. A lot of times we get the question, especially when we're talking to students about what they're already doing, they say, well, I'm not sure if this counts. Everything that you spend in time on that we can quantify counts. So this could be community organizations, religious organizations, something you're passionate about. Jim mentioned the gym earlier. Let's say you're someone who goes to the gym every single day, right? And that's something you really care about, but you also happen to be on the soccer team. Get a bunch of your soccer teammates together, right? And this is a common example I give, but get those teammates together, get a workout plan together, and now you guys have a separate thing that you do within the context of your soccer community, right? So you could start a book club, you can start charitable organizations, and it doesn't always mean that you have to start something. Just get really involved in the things that you do get involved with. With that said, the ninth grade summer is kind of one of the summer after ninth grade is one of those where if you can find a way to stay busy, find a way to pursue your interests, that's going to be awesome. At the same time, remember, you still want to be a kid, right? Enjoy your time off with your friends. Enjoy your time off. You need to relax. I know a lot of what we talked about is academics, but making sure you find that right, for lack of a better word, work-life balance as a high schooler as well, right? You need to have your time to rest, relax, do the things that you enjoy that aren't necessarily going to show up on your resume. Now, with a lot of the clubs that you do, you might end up, or organizations or things you're involved with, you might just end up on college campuses. Your field hockey team might have a tournament at a particular college campus. Your debate team or Model UN team might end up going to a conference that's on a college campus. You don't need to decide where you're going to college right now. We don't need to talk about that for a couple years. With that being said, if you do find yourselves on campus, right, just look around a little bit, see if you like it. If you happen to be in a city, do you like the idea of being in a city, particularly if you're for living in the suburbs or more rural area? Is that something that appeals to you? If you end up in a place that's more of a college town, right, a Penn State, a University of Tennessee, Knoxville, right, where everything in that area revolves around the school, is that an environment that you like, where everyone always has the flags up and the campus shuts down on Saturday, right? For whatever for the football team. And so is that an environment you're interested in? Just as you start to go through these processes, you don't need to actually take any steps right now, but if you are able to do some accidental college research, figure out what you like and don't like so that when you do start thinking about this a little bit more at the end of your sophomore year or the start of your junior year, you have some ideas of what you like and don't like. Because fundamentally, at the end of the day, for your students, you're always going to be able to find a good academic match, right? A bunch of schools that have the subject your student wants to study, has a good program in that matches the student academically. There's going to be 50, 100 options a lot of the time, depending on what your student's at and what your student's looking for. So, how do you narrow that down? Well, part of it's going to be where does your student want to live for 4 years, right? Does your student want to go a plane right away? Are you okay with your student going a plane right away, right? Are they okay applying to the school 15 minutes away? So these are all different things, and just not just location, but size of school environment. A student that finds a college campus that they're going to be happy at is a student that's going to do well once they get to that particular college campus.
Well said. So we've covered a whole lot tonight, and as we wrap things up and head into Q&A, I want to just go back through kind of what do we actually need to do this year. So here's your checklist for what you can consider a highly successful ninth grade year. Number one, acclimate to high school, right? And take your time and give yourself the grace to do that. That means socially, academically, make sure that you're getting comfortable in this new environment where you're going to spend a lot of time for the next 4 years. Number two, focus on getting great grades between now and the end of the year. This is kind of your primary directive as a high school student and as a future college applicant. Do as well as you possibly can in the classroom, of course, within reason and work-life balance, but you really want to just try to perform your absolute best. That is how you're going to learn the most and how you're going to set yourself up for success in your next steps. Make sure you're exploring extracurricular interests. So, Karan mentioned ninth grade, it's a time to explore, try different things. If you end up going to a club meeting, trying a sports team, and you realize you hate it, that's a win. That means you now know, okay, great, I need to find something different. That is knowledge, and you should be thankful you found that, not sad that you wasted time on it. Because it's not a waste of time to figure out what you don't like in this world. You can ask your parents. Adults are, very grateful when they realize what they shouldn't be spending time on. And then finally, make sure you're making informed course selection decisions. Start to think, for instance, if you might be leaning into STEM fields about your math level and setting yourself up for success that way. Make sure you're taking courses that are going to challenge yourself, but also set you up to succeed. All right, thank you everyone so much. We'll hop into Q&A now. Here I have links to sign up for tutoring with us if you know you'd like to work with us on tutoring in a subject that you're anticipating having to work a little harder on this year. And if you'd like a personal advising session, this would be a meeting with one of our coaches. You could request Karan if you liked what he had to say tonight, where we talk you through kind of the six-factor analysis and exactly what your student should be focused on in the short term. So not just saying you should go explore extracurricular activities, but let's talk about your interests and brainstorm some actual ideas for activities. And we'll also be able to work on course selection later in the year and things like that. So, without further ado, we'll jump into questions. And like I said, keep them coming in the Q&A because we can stick around for as long as you have them. Our first question that came in, Karan, you mentioned trying 10 different clubs. How many clubs should a student join freshman year?
So, in terms of initial meetings, go to as many as you want. There's no limit on the number of clubs you can try. With that being said, keep your schedule reasonable, right? Colleges want to see depth in your activities, not just the fact that you have 10 different places you're going to for an hour a week. So pick the couple clubs that you can truly get involved with and have an impact at. So, is it a club where you can get involved early, whether it's a robotics team or a debate team? Did you make the team? Can you help, or did you make the practice squad? Or how are you helping team people just practice for actual competitions, right? But there's no exact number, but the way you kind of want to look at it is in addition to kind of your school time, you want to be looking at a couple hours every day after school where you're involved in something else that's not necessarily academic, but is something of an extracurricular for you. Like, for example, a lot of students might have one extracurricular activity because they run track in the fall, they run winter track in the spring, in the winter, and they run spring track in the spring, right? And so they only have one activity, but they're really involved in that activity because it takes 2, 3 hours a day throughout the entire school year, every day after school for practice, plus meets, that sort of thing. On the flip side, other students, and the same goes for theater. Theater and sports kind of align in that way, where rehearsals and practices kind of happen every day after school, right? So it's not about the number, it's about the quality of the activities that you have and how much you can actually stay involved in those activities throughout your freshman year.
Well said. Another question here. So, for students who are trying to set themselves up for a rigorous course load, what grades would they need to get into AP classes next year?
So it depends on the school. So depending on your high school and kind of what they offer in terms of honors and AP courses, typically if you're moving up a level or you want the highest level, the teachers are going to be looking for that A and one that's going to kind of have been one that you like truly like you did well in the course, right? It's not just about skating by on class participation and that sort of thing. It's making sure you're doing well in the tests and quizzes because they want to make sure you don't necessarily challenge yourself too much and end up in a course where you're going to struggle, right? So the teacher needs to see that quality performance from you, and that doesn't mean you can't ask that teacher for help, right? If the teacher sees that you're the kind of student where if you do struggle a little bit, you're going to stay after and make sure you get the help you need, they will still recommend you for an honors or AP class. So it's not a definitive grade of like, hey, if you get definitely a 92 in this class, you're going to be recommended the higher course. It's kind of how you get there, but typically, if you want the higher level courses, you're looking at getting an A in the current course that you're in.
Well said. Another question here. My school doesn't offer AP courses for freshmen. Am I at a disadvantage for college admissions because of that?
So, no. So, one thing that goes with your application to colleges, and it goes with every student from your high school's applications to every single college they apply to, is called a school profile. So, this tells those colleges information about your high school in case the admissions officer is not as well acquainted with it, right? Now, your state school might know your high school well, but if you're flying across the country or to a smaller school a couple thousand miles away, they might not know your high school that well, right? So the school profile gives them information about the number of students, average GPAs, test scores, things like that, so that the admissions officer gets some insight on your high school. This also includes what coursework is available at your high school. Some schools offer a lot of AP classes, some only have a couple. Excuse me, there's a school called the Haverford Boys School on the main line, which is here in Philadelphia, the suburbs of Philadelphia, that did no APs, right? That's not held against those students because the honors classes at those schools are AP level courses, right? They have very difficult courses. They just don't necessarily have the AP designation. A lot of those students end up taking AP courses or excuse me, AP tests after like they take their honors classes. So it's not a disadvantage for you if your school doesn't allow to do it because the college admissions officer will be able to see that on your school profile.
All right, well said. It looks like those are all the questions we have. One thing I want to emphasize is that if you have a question that's more specific to your student, feel free to email us, info@myivexperience.com, or call or text our office number, and we're happy to have a more in-depth conversation about your student's situation in particular. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and giving us your Thursday before Labor Day weekend. For those of you who haven't snuck away to the shore yet or gone on vacation elsewhere, we really appreciate you being here. And we hope you guys have an incredibly successful freshman year, and we'll be here to support in whatever way we can. Thanks, and have a great night, everybody.
Have a good
Bye.
night, Jim. Goodbye, everyone.